Hello and welcome to our 27th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Edwin, live in Boston, joined by
Johansson, live in Charlotte.
Hey Johansson, what do we have lined up today?
Thanks, Edwin, and those in the audience, thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk about the numerous challenges financial services organizations have when it comes to the massive amount of volume that has to be managed.
That's right, Johansson. No wonder 88% of organizations have no confidence that they can detect and prevent loss of their sensitive data. So next, we're going to go through a whiteboard exercise to illustrate Microsoft's approach to data governance.
And third, we're going to see some cool demos reimagining data governance through a cloud service that creates a holistic, up-to-date map of your data landscape with automated data discovery, sensitive data classification, and end-to-end data lineage.
Then we'll wrap it up with Q&A.
Today on FSI Fridays.
For those of you watching live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend about 30 minutes on today's topic.
And then leave the last 10 to 15 minutes to address any burning questions.
So please the Q&A window, and we'll monitor for questions during the presentation. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's get started and meet today's presenter, Johansson, who's our special guest this week.
Thanks, Edwin. So we are thrilled to be joined by our chief technical architects today. Let's start with you, Todd. Todd, thanks for being on the show today. Can you let our audience know what your role is at Microsoft and what your typical day is like? We also heard this time of COVID gave you the ability to travel and spend time with someone important to you.
Yeah, thank you, Johansson. I'm really happy to be here and talking to you folks today. So I work along with Alex inside of our Microsoft Technology Center organization in our MSU SCTO org at Microsoft. And we exist to work with customers to solve big problems across solution areas, across technology areas. So we're really business outcome focused. We work in depth with customers. So an average engagement with a customer might be 2, 3, maybe even 5 to 10 days, depending on what we're doing, because we go from strategy to hands-on.
Great. I've always and what's some of the fun fact? When did you get to spend time with?
Right. So there was a kind of a bucket list item for me where I was able to go and do a week-long rafting trip down the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon with my oldest daughter. Usually that's a trip you have to book a year or two out. There were some openings, and we were able to take advantage of the time this summer to do that, and it was wonderful. I'll just say that.
Sounds like fun, Todd. I think I just added that to my bucket list. We're also joined by Alex Steinberg. Alex, what's your role at Microsoft? And we hear you're also making the best out of COVID, and it's almost as good as Disney's World Fast Pass.
I'm in the same role as Todd, but I'm located in New York City, which I've been enjoying tremendously in this time of almost no guests in the city. So I've been spending a lot of times in museums and enjoying the fact that there are no lines and there's nobody to compete with in those spaces. I focus on fun topics of security, compliance, and privacy. And being in New York City, I work with a lot of financial services customers.
That's great, Alex. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about data. Why is data so important to our financial services organizations?
I think we all realize that data is at the heart of financial services. And whether it's traditional projects like customer cross-sell and upsell or risk management, or newer type of initiatives like open banking initiative in Europe or analyzing and settlement, cash settlement, all of this depends on the data. And the data estate keeps growing exponentially. But we also have to be able to use it correctly in such a way that new business initiatives start. And very, very often what we find working with our financial services customers is that just the fact of finding the right data and finding the right quality of data is preventing the innovation in this space.
No, that makes sense, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. But go ahead and lay it out for us. So with the enormous amounts of data, how do we manage it, govern it? We'd love to hear your perspectives, especially since you help provide architectural guidance and best practices to many of our financial services organizations.
Well, that's the difficult part, I think, for a lot of financial services. I think financial services is probably one of the most regulated sectors in the world, and there are so many rules and so many challenges that you have to deal with from privacy perspective or from data exposure and protection perspective. And the challenge is that data is sort of this. It's almost like water. Once you have access to it, it tends to leak through in many, many different directions. So there is a balance that you have to achieve between using data for new business initiatives or existing business initiative, and how do you protect it and control it. There are also newer issues like how do you know which data sets you can or cannot put together in order to comply with a number of regulations in Europe and in US and in other countries.
So Alex, as we think about all of this data flowing out, data governance is even more increasingly important, specifically in financial services, as there are numerous challenges to overcome, like what is my data footprint? Who created that data? Do the right people have access to that data? And is it the right level of access? To all the way to the certain types of data and whether that data is compliant. And as you work with our financial services customers, how do they ensure that they're adhering to these regulation requirements? And maybe even take us through the lens of a chief data officer and what they kind of need to be thinking about as it relates to data governance.
Yeah, and that's the seesaw that we usually talk through with many customers that go through Microsoft Technology Center sessions. How do you enable business? How do you enable easier access to the data while maintaining compliance? And with GDPR and California privacy regulations, Chief Data Officer is at kind of the heart of that problem. They need to balance it, and they're also responsible for that kind of balance. And there are many, many other regulations around the world that require it. So I'll walk you through. I'll play kind of the bad cop in this scenario, and I'll be the compliance person. I'll describe what our strategy is on the high level from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, so hey, Alex, it would be great if you could help our audience understand Microsoft's approach to data governance. I hear you have a really good whiteboard that resonates with customers. So can you bring this to us for life? Bring this to life for us.
Absolutely. So we've been building for quite some time a compliance module that is extensible and open-ended in such a way that we can deal with different types of data. And data, by the way, means many different things to many different people, right? It could be structured data, it could be unstructured data, it could be video files or some other data type. So I'm using the term data generically, and that's what we've been designing the solution for. Now, there are traditional elements in compliance like data loss prevention, but there are also newer capabilities that we've been introducing, like communication compliance, which is required for regulated customer roles by a number of different regulations in order to randomly check for particular communications. We've also have the insider risk management capabilities and many others, as you can see in this list. And insider risk is now, from a security perspective and compliance perspective, becoming a #1 issue for a lot of companies, not just financial services. So there's a lot of things we've built, but they're all, one nice thing I like about Microsoft design from architecture perspective is they all build on top of each other. They all use the same underlying concepts, and they can cross-correlate between each other. And it all starts with understanding your data, understanding what you have, where do you have it, and how. And we have these classifiers that are starting points in the compliance space for data classifiers. And there are many different types. There are pattern-based, there's machine learning-based, there is exact data match-based, and so on and so forth. And that's at the heart, we first need to understand what it is. But we give you a lot of these out of the box. They're all customizable. A lot of financial services are looking at it, but we're looking at what compliance frameworks we're working with regulators, and we're identifying what is valuable and important to support. So there's lots of out of the box capabilities. Now, of course, anything inside our cloud services like Office 365 can then use this out of the box. So there are things like Exchange and SharePoint and other services that we have from a collaboration perspective. Once I define these things, or I use out of the box ones, I can always go in and say things like, where do I have credit card numbers? How much of it exists in my environment? That helps me as a compliance officer to try to prioritize. There's tons of data, but how do I know what is or is not critical for me to invest in? That gives me a very quick count and visibility of anything that I store in our collaboration platform, in various technologies in the collaboration platform. But the same concepts can also apply, the same analytics can also apply to on-premise services.
So Alex, what you're showing us here is really that this compliance around these sensitive information types or these data classifiers, you can apply them to Office 365. So, and on premises. Love to hear more about how many of our financial services customers have large data estates that are still in their on-premises data centers. So how does this cloud-based compliance management help solve that challenge?
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole beauty of the open-ended system. We can analyze on-premise file servers or on-premise repositories against the same data definition. So you define things once, you create your rules once, and you can use different modules. For on-premise specifically, you use a scanning type of methodology where we can understand and you can schedule it so that then reporting becomes in one place. So the data doesn't move, it stays on-premise, but I can see all this data within the same compliance portal together with the Office 365 and other elements.
So, Alex, the data that lives outside of Microsoft 365 and on-premises, what about other cloud services? Is it important to integrate, as much as we love all our customers to just have Microsoft, that's not the reality. And I know we play well with others. So what's your perspective there?
Yes, that's correct. There is lots of cloud services that are used by customers. And we are, like I keep saying, it's pretty open. We can, through another subsystem that we have, called Microsoft Cloud App Security, scan things like Box and Salesforce and so on and so forth. I'll just give you a quick example. In here, I have connected to Salesforce and Box, and you can see that I'm actually classifying it using the same methodology, using the same information. I can even go further and in these third-party systems start doing policy controls like, well, it's classified as confidential, but you just shared it in a third-party service. Maybe I should stop you from doing that. So yes, it applies to third parties as well.
And so that really gives our financial services customers that leverage this as a kind of centralized compliance management tool the ability to create these data classifiers, which whether they be patterns or machine learning or things like data match, and then be able to apply them into multiple different locations. Could you talk a little bit more on that policy piece in terms of how maybe these labels can actually be used and maybe how they can be applied?
Right. So the first step is understanding what you have. It helps me prioritize. It helps me understand what I need to invest in. But the next step is then how do I act on it? How do I actually protect information? How do I actually control what it does? And that gets us into this concept of labeling the data, whether they're labeled from security perspective or labeled from user education perspective. On top of all these detections, now I can start designing methodology for protecting my information wherever it lives. And I designed it in our platform, in our compliance platform, based on this concept of labeling the information itself. So if I look at something like this sensitive financial information label, I can do a variety of things to a variety of content. Let's just dig into one of them. And I can scope it to many different things. Let's just look at files and emails for a second. And I can start protecting my contents wherever it lives. I can start applying encryption to it. I can start applying permissioning to it. So traditional things like I have a data and I have an Excel file, which is common in financial services, and I'm going to send it out. And let's say I did an oops and I accidentally send it to somebody. I can automatically, behind the scenes, using this platform, protect this file for many scenarios like that. And these are all based, like I said, on these sensitive information types that we talked about before, whether they are machine learning based or patterns based, or even based on a template that somebody created from the environment. So, and this again, because of this open-ended system, I can apply it to any assets that I have in my environment, devices, Office 365, on premises, or even these third parties, as we keep saying. Now, the focus today is, so I've talked so far really about this unstructured data world, right? The files and the other kind of assets. What we want to shift to is a new capabilities with Purview.
So Alex, just to maybe set the stage here, right? So many of the areas that you've talked about here were kind of Microsoft 365, the data center, all the way to other cloud services, and then you even talked about very briefly devices as well. But there's all these kind of cloud data forms, things that may live inside of Azure, for example. And I think that's what you're about to talk to and share with our audience here is kind of the capabilities of Purview.
Yeah, like I said, data means many different things. There's unstructured and structured data. So how do we take the same system, the same framework, the same rules, and start applying it not just to unstructured data, but structured? So this is what Todd is going to show you, this capability. But this is where we're venturing into structured data understanding, things like SQL or Oracle or Azure services, like Azure storage. We even supporting things like AWS S3 buckets and so on and so forth. So now we're moving towards more structured data, but again, the compliance methodology is the same. You set up one rules, you see things in one place, you can make this intelligent decisions based on entire data estate, not just a particular aspect. Of course, rules can be different for different sources.
No, thanks, Alex. That's been super helpful. As we think about data sources that are outside of Microsoft 365 realm, how can we help our customers manage data governance across their data estate? Todd, do you mind? Can you share your screen and walk us through Azure Purview, as Alex is mentioning, as not only the way to govern the data, but also how powerful it can be to discover it?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. So what you're seeing now, I'm seeing my screen at this point, is Azure Purview. Azure Purview is currently in preview, so just kind of an FYI on that. It's recently been announced, so check out some of those announcements and videos that have been published recently. This is the Purview portal. So this is I'm gonna first walk you through some of the ways that even a user can discover the data that's in the organization and the different aspects from which they can discover that. One of the things real quick that I just want to show is that there's even this idea of a glossary where if I have asset management as a term in my organization, I can go into here and see the assets associated with that. But I'd like to actually show, let's say I'm a new employee and I want to discover the things that have to do with customers in my organization. I can come to the search bar here and just type customer. And then I have different facets over here that I can filter on, and I can see the results over here on the right. So let's say I want to find things that are related to email address based on classification. And by the way, you may be wondering, these are the same rules that Alex showed over on the M365 side. There's an integration, and that's why this is a platform, right? So now we have unification of these rules across both the things that are traditional documents, email, things that live in M365, and now things that live in DBMSs, that live in data lakes, that live in other clouds. I think traditionally, I'm traditionally a data person. And again, what does that mean? It means something different to Alex, maybe, as it does to me. It means to me things that are like rectangular, or things that are JSON files or Parquet. But now that these are becoming unified.
Hey, Todd, real quick, that actually resonates with me. I'm going through an exercise where I have, I'm trying to consolidate all my, this is random, consolidate all my pictures for the past 15 years digitally.
Sure.
I have all these different, cameras and formats, and I'm trying to, build RAID hardware and then just like throw them in. But having the ability to find all the different data sources or pictures in my case, and throwing it into one place where you can search and classify it, and, is, I think, super powerful and would make our lives much easier.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm really passionate about this, about data architecture and building platforms to enable users and organizations. And been talking to users. One of the ways to do that is a data lake. So this enables you to catalog and scan those. We'll talk about scanning here in a moment. But I found this customer table, which seems like it might be relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish in my job. So if I click on that, I see some metadata about this. I see that this has been tagged with email address, a person's name, and US phone number. Again, those come out of the M365 rules that Alex previously showed. I can automatically connect to that in Power BI Desktop. And I can even start to see who can I reach out to ask, how do I get access? Or how do I understand a little more about what's in this repository? And not only that, I can see the lineage of this data. Right? So where did the data come from, and where is it going in my organization? This helps both from a discovery perspective, from compliance perspective. You can kind of see how the information that I've showed so far can help me both of those. So this is a really cool way to do that.
So Todd, I think, double down on this a little bit, right? You showed how someone as an end user, maybe a data scientist, et cetera, can find data, understand who's the owner of that data. But then if you go back to kind of Alex's talk around, that chief data officer, I can also see how that data is being leveraged across the organization as well. What's interesting here is you showed kind of that Azure SQL table. I'm kind of curious to see what other sources can we add, how easy it is for our customers to bring in those sources. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And what I'm showing here is all of the sources that have currently been registered with this instance of Azure Purview. And you'll see there's a lot of Azure-y type things that are in here. And you should expect to see more. Alex already mentioned Amazon, S3 buckets and things like that. And those things are coming. You can see that I even have SQL Server on premises. So this isn't just about Azure. It's not just about the cloud. It's about where does your data live, and how do you manage that and enable people to discover it, and how do you understand from a compliance perspective where you stand? So this is where I can come in and set up scans, which will actually drill in and discover data sources, and then discover the information and the data that lives inside of that, and then bounce those rules that Alex talked about earlier against those data sources. So you can learn a lot by setting up some of these initial scans to see what you actually have.
It does. I mean, it's super powerful, to be able to scan this data. Is it taking that data? Is it moving to the cloud? Like, where does that all tie in here?
That's a very, very common question. I have all these databases in on premises, or I have all these data sources in other clouds. If I scan that and I capture that inside of Azure Purview in my data catalog capability, am I exfiltrating any data? The only data that you're exfiltrating is metadata. The data stays where it lives. Obviously, that's going to be important from a compliance perspective. The data is not leaving and then being stored elsewhere. There's metadata about the types of data that's in there, maybe the schema and the lineage, but that's it. The data stays where it lives, which is very important. Really good question.
Yeah, and I think our financial services are quite concerned about kind of where their data is to be able to manage that. Alex showed us kind of insights around these classifications, and I know Azure Purview has very similar capabilities. And if I'm the chief data office and I'm looking at holistically across my data set and where it lives, it'd be great to get some of this insights to kind of make some decisions.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. So I've gone to there's actually a section in Azure Purview called Insights, very apt. It enables me to see at a high level initially what types of sources am I scanning, how many assets have I tagged, and how many assets have I classified. And then I can see a breakdown of where my data lives inside my organization. And what's really cool here is this is back to the same. So Alex, one of the examples he showed was around credit cards, right? So being able to see, here's some financial things that are related to my sources. And then I can drill into here and see I actually do have 48 classifications that meet the credit card qualification. And I can drill in here and see where these things are living. So here's all the things that have been classified from that perspective. And if I drill into potentially, email address here, I can see here's the actual sources that contain, and the number of files that contain that classified information that was scanned by Azure Purview automatically. So being able, and again, this is where just even scanning your environment, even if you haven't turned this loose on your users yet from a discoverability perspective, you can learn a lot about the data that's in your databases, that's in your data lakes. That leaky data that Alex talked about as it becomes like water. I think that was a good analogy, Alex. So this really helps.
I completely agree on that analogy. Hey, Todd, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I have a question from Anonymous. How does Purview know that about these sensitive information types?
That's a great question. So, and Alex, feel free to jump on this too. But back when Alex was showing the M365 Compliance Center and he was showing those classifications, some of those were automatically imported from Microsoft developed rules, and you can create your own rules as well. Those get pulled in. And if I go over to really quick, I think I should be able to do this without stumbling over myself too hard, is this will show where some of these rules are defined and these classifications are defined. So I can actually see that maybe a rule for an ABA routing number is a particular regular expression or something like that. But there's an integration between Microsoft Information Protection as well as Purview. They're integrated together as a platform.
So Todd, what I'm hearing is you can actually create them all in that compliance portal, and it automatically replicates into Azure Purview. So then you're really defining the rules in terms of the data classifiers. And you talked about these sensitive information ones. I'm also a little bit curious around some of our machine learning capabilities, the ability to then go and maybe train a machine learning model without having a data scientist to actually go in and build that model. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And that's one of the things that, having a data lake really can enable, because that really takes the data and makes it accessible to folks in the machine learning or data science groups, or even business users who are doing AutoML and things like that. So we have tools in Azure, for example, Azure Machine Learning, as it's called, where you can go in and do auto machine learning on top of these things. And if you're tagging and scanning these data sources with things like Azure Purview, you're enabling the data to stay governed and secure while enabling the business to accomplish what they're trying to do.
Hey, Todd, I have another question here. Can you show us what data source you can add and how easy it is to do it?
Sure, I'll
do
do
we
that
get
right
here?
now. So if I go over to the data sources section of Azure Purview, you see I have home, sources, glossary, insights, and management center. Sources is where I can register new sources. And I can look at it from a table view or even a map view. And the map view is relevant because I can create these things called a collection. So if I wanted to create a collection of data sources that was related to financial data or sensitive information, I can do that. But I can simply go over here and say register. I pick the type of thing that I want to register. Maybe it's an Azure SQL database, maybe it's blob storage, or maybe it's a SQL server on premises. And like I said, there are going to be a myriad of different types of data sources that are going to be added soon. Once Purview approaches general availability, we're going to be adding things from other clouds and all kinds of other things. But this is exactly where you would go to do that. And it's as simple as pointing to the database in your subscription or wherever it happens to live.
Todd, could you talk a little bit about maybe access management in terms of security? Like we've got all this data in here. How do I know maybe who has access to that?
Right, and there's going to be a couple different ways to do that. One of the capabilities of the Azure Data Lake store inside of Azure is the ability to set ACLs at a file folder level, and a lot of our database technologies have that same thing. So data access can mean a lot of things. It could mean, can I select it at all? Can I see particular rows or particular columns? So some of those things are going to be at a data source level. And of course, there is access control inside of the catalog as well. So being able to see the data inside of Azure Purview from a discovery perspective doesn't necessarily mean you have access to the underlying data, which is of course a good thing. And that's why we have information in here about context. So perhaps I need to reach out to Pratik to gain access to this particular data source.
That's great, Todd. Thank you for sharing this kind of overview of Azure Purview. I'm sure our audience is probably curious and probably excited to get working with this. What's the call to actions and maybe resources that are available for customers to get started with this right away?
Oh, great question. So Azure Purview is in preview now, so it's available to folks to try out if you have an Azure subscription. So I would recommend, there's a link there, the third link in the slide there, where you can go out and view the documentation, go through some walkthroughs and some getting started. There's even some information. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that there are APIs available for Azure Purview as well that sit on top of some open source standards. So all that documentation is there. So depending on if you're just getting started with data cataloging and compliance, or if you're pretty advanced and you already have other tools in your organization, the documentation in this page here should get you what you need.
That's great. Todd and Alex, we're going to move on to the next section. Thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective on this. I'm positive our viewers have learned a wealth of valuable information.
So what we learned today is data being sourced from more places than ever, and business use cases and financial services, varied techniques from self-service BI to machine learning to cross-organization data sharing. Managing a modern data estate presents many challenges for our financial services customers.
That's right, Johansson. We went through a whiteboard on how Microsoft's approach the data sprawl problem with a mix of unstructured and structured data requiring a sound governance approach.
We also learned how we can centralize the compliance management and then saw a powerful demo of how this can be applied not only to the Microsoft-related sources, but leveraging how Azure Purview can be able to provide deep insights and empower data consumers to find valuable, trustworthy data adhering to compliance and regulatory requirements.
So if you're interested in starting the journey, or if you're in the middle of it and would like some guidance, please reach out to your account teams and we can schedule an envisioning session and follow up.
Really great stuff here. Thank you again, Todd and Alex.
Yep. Johansson, let's move on to the Q&A. What are some of our viewers asking?
So we've got a question in here coming from Anonymous. How long does it take to pull all of this data in? And do you find any barriers for financial services trying to work across our organization to centralize maybe this compliance journey?
So I think I'll take the first part of that, maybe, in relation to at least what I showed in Purview, and maybe hand the second part to Alex. So from my perspective, it depends on how much data you have. So if you have a rather large data lake or a large number of disparate sources, which, let's be honest, many organizations do, that could take a while to discover and find all of those and get them added. But a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So starting to get that in there is a good way to go. And you can set up scanning schedules, and you have control over how the Azure Purview service reaches out to those services.
And I'll answer it from a compliance perspective. It is a step-by-step process. You can start small, like I said, with just understanding your compliance state and then prioritizing things. So we are building this unified system because it's much easier to do compliance in one place there rather than 1,000. But it presents an organizational challenges, I find, for a lot of financial services customers. You actually have to do cross-organizational teams and, surprisingly enough, talk to each other. So that there's a people process, which is a much more difficult issue for a lot of large organizations rather than technology. Technology at this point is it's actually pretty solid.
Oh, that's fantastic. We have another question here. Someone's super excited. When can I get a hold of this, and what's on the roadmap?
So Purview is available, right? So you can go in and you can start to create an instance inside of Azure. There was that link that was in the slide. So if you want to know how to get started, there's some walkthroughs there. It kind of walks you through creating an account inside of Azure and starting to scan your data sources. So definitely check that out. The biggest thing for roadmap is getting this thing more mature. It's still GA, getting it ready for all of those things that really require SLAs for general availability. And of course, for me, adding more data sources is going to be huge, because nobody has one vendor's data sources, and nobody has one cloud, and nobody's just on-prem or in the cloud. So bringing in those more data sources is going to be key there to really bring the value out of Azure Purview.
There is a public roadmap for Azure services, roadmap.azure.com, and there is a similar roadmap that we publish for Microsoft 365 services on roadmap.office.com. So you can check out our public announcement. We try to keep that as current as possible. Overall, I would say it is continuously evolving. So there's always improvements. It's sometimes, and the interesting thing is also a change in perspective for a lot of customers. Sometimes I do a demo, and while I'm doing it, there's something new popping up for me. So it's very fast moving. There's lots of improvements, and they are all customer feedback. It's the more customers ask us for something, the more we prioritize.
That's great. One more question from Anonymous. As I understand, there can only be one instance of data catalog per organization or domain. Is that still true with Purview?
No. I do remember those days when we had something that's in market called Azure Data Catalog. This is the evolution of that. I won't call it a V2 because it's really a separate thing. But it's an evolution of what we have in Azure Data Catalog, and you could really have one per tenant. Azure Purview does not have that. Now, of course, the question is, are you doing centralized? Alex spoke to some of this around centralization and cross-team collaboration. So, I'm going to encourage everyone to work on that communication, to work on a centralized strategy, while enabling folks in different business units and different teams to have the flexibility that they need. But you should be able to create multiple Purview instances.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So listen, it looks like we ran out of time. Thanks again for attending via YouTube or watching live and asking questions.
If you haven't already, be sure to register for FSI notifications and invites by visiting aka.ms/FSI Fridays.
We're also open to constructive feedback, so please send us your comments and suggestions at aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback.
And if you enjoyed this video, please watch our rest of our recordings on previous sessions on our YouTube channel, aka.ms/FSI Fridays recap, where you can also post any follow-up questions that weren't covered today.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So thank you so much. Johansson, we have such an awesome lineup for the rest of January. Why don't you give the audience a preview of what's happening over the coming weeks?
Thanks, Edwin. So we have an amazing lineup to conclude the rest of January. Next week, we're going to be joined by our Corporate Vice President of Worldwide Financial Services, Bill Borden, who will discuss the evolution of modern banking and best practices for transforming digitally and meeting the needs of the market.
That's right. And finally on January 29, our new solution showcase, where we are joined by Steve Tretrol and Ken Kuzdas from our partner Nudesic. They have a really neat solution enabling customers to quickly and easily apply AI to business scenarios.
You won't want to miss it.
Thanks, and see you next time
on FSI Fridays.
Thank you.